Yeah, I'll react to that, sure.
Hey guys, let's learn. Why did Sweden decline? History matters. Love this channel. I've seen many dozens and dozens of videos from History Matters. They're short, but for someone like me who's not great with learning about a topic that's new to me, like detail by detail, I just can't learn. This channel is really helpful in that for me. Original link, top of the description. My name's Connor if you're new. Hi, guys. Let's learn. Why did Sweden decline? Great Northern War. Napoleonic Wars. They were involved. Bernadotte. After that, let's learn.
Sweden was one of Europe's in the 17th century. Sweden was one of Europe's leading military and political powers. Yet,
Gustavus?
2 centuries later, its power was greatly diminished, its holdings smaller, and its foreign policy mostly neutral. So how did this happen? How did Sweden go from a military great power with significant influence in northern, central, and eastern Europe to a country
Gustavus
which avoided
Adolphus.
foreign entanglements? So before we can talk about how Sweden declined, it's important to know why it rose in the first place. Sweden was a country with a small population which often lived under the Danish thumb. This changed in 1523 when Sweden
Guys, does the
Sweden
does the mountain range between Sweden and Norway kind of, if that didn't exist, do you think Norway would not have stood a chance of being completely taken over? Or no?
declined, it's important which avoided
Maybe that was part of Denmark at the time.
foreign entanglements. So before we can talk about how Sweden declined, it's important to know why it rose in the first place. Sweden was a country with
Really
a small
good military
population which
tactics?
often lived under the Danish thumb. This changed in 1523 when Sweden, led by its new king Gustav Vasa, won its independence and began to reform the country. It was able to grow to become a major power with one neat trick: lots of money.
Interesting. Malmo, right, is in this area, and I hear it's more. Wait, is that controversial? I was going to say kind of Danish. Forget it. Obviously, it's Sweden. I'm not giving territorial disputes. Just more. Forget it. Never mind.
Reform the country. It was able to grow to become a major power with one neat trick: lots of money. So how did it do this? First of all, most of Sweden's peasantry were free, and so they pay taxes directly to the crown instead of their local lord. This made Sweden much wealthier than its similar-sized peers because there were less people skimming money from the top, and more secure because the nobles weren't strong enough to rebel. Another way Sweden's wealth grew was that it converted to Protestantism, which meant that the crown could just take all of the lands and the wealth of the Catholic Church for itself. And so, with all of this new money, the Swedish updated their military by emphasizing mixed arms, better firearms, and logistics. This was combined with some good old-fashioned generalship, which meant that when wars came up, Sweden was more than ready. Now, Sweden was very successful in these wars, and from the year 1600 to 1650, it gained all of this territory. This success can largely be attributed to its professional military, but there was one drawback to this. It was extremely
Size?
expensive, and ultimately the Swedish state couldn't afford it. This largely meant that the only way to keep it was to use other people's money.
I feel like was Sweden had the same issue that countries like Japan or maybe the UK. Well, the UK has a lot of coal. In that you have well, Japan has a large population. I'm contradicting myself. It seems like Sweden didn't have the population and productive territory, though I think out of the Nordic countries, Sweden has more farmland and stuff, I'd imagine. I'm contradicting myself. I don't know. Okay.
There were two ways that Sweden did this: payments from a third country, mostly France, or by plundering someone else's country and winning compensation in the
Lithuania?
peace treaties afterwards. This actually worked really well for about a century. The problem was that this system would come to a crashing halt if there was ever a long peace or if Sweden suffered a major defeat, and eventually lose the Swedish
Just keep war.
crashing halt if there was ever a long peace or if Sweden suffered a major defeat, and eventually lose the Swedish did. And this defeat came during the Great Northern War, which began in the year 1700. Sweden had a new king, and its enemies decided that now was a good time
Yeah,
to
it seems given this makes it all the more impressive that given its situation, geographical, that it couldn't have really hoped to hold on to much power in the first place, but did. as he said, for like a century, holding onto a lot of this stuff. And so it seems like there was an inevitable fall. And so holding on to power for as long as it did, I think is extra impressive.
To attack. 1800. Sweden had a new king, and its enemies decided that now was a good time to attack. All of them did poorly,
Charles?
and when the Russians offered peace to the Swedish, they refused. And its king, Charles XII, began a long campaign marching through Poland and Lithuania to dethrone its king before entering Russia. Long story short, things didn't go
Chased
too well,
into
and
the
after
Ottomans.
a harsh winter, the two fought at Poltava in 1709. Here, the Swedish were crushed, and its king fled to the Ottoman Empire.
There's a Sabaton song for that, isn't there? Poltava or...
Fought at Poltava in 1709. Here, the Swedish were crushed and its king fled to the Ottoman Empire, and Russia promptly took all of this land. And this loss was a death blow to Sweden's prospects as a great military power, because now it no longer controlled sea trade to Russia, its population and tax base had been reduced, and its reputation lay in ruins. Sweden, now being broke, meant that it relied on France for protection, which led to France dictating Swedish foreign policy, which meant wars. None of these went particularly well, and by the time the Napoleonic Wars came about, Sweden was ultimately diminished. When its rulers refused to embrace the continental system imposed by Napoleon, the Russians invaded and conquered Finland. And soon after this, the king was deposed. The Swedes then thought, hey, this Napoleon guy is kind of a winner. We should pick a French guy for our throne,
Bernadotte?
and when Napoleon defeats the Russians, he'll get Finland back and maybe a little bit more. But fun fact, no. Instead, the new king sided against Napoleon, and after the
Traitor to Napoleon! Alright. No, he's in charge. Sweden is what he's worried about, not Napoleon anymore, so I understand.
war was over, Sweden gained Norway. This certainly gave Sweden more prestige and more money, but by this point its kings were sick of losing. And so they maintained a policy of neutrality. This kept Sweden safe throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, but it did mean that its days as a great military power were well and truly over. I hope you enjoyed this episode, with a special thanks.
Great video as always from History Matters. You know what a terrifying reality I'm starting to notice? Is that the only way to gain power and hold it is if you conquer areas and either slaughter or subjugate harshly and import your own citizens who identify as Swedish to an area for a long enough time that the areas, you know, that were on mainland Europe. I know you can say Scandinavia is mainland, but like look at America, for instance, mainly due to smallpox, but also just manifest destinying all over the continent. That replacing the people living where you conquered with your people and people who identify as Swedish or any country that you're in this scenario, and then holding that, like that is seems like the only way to have long lasting peace. As long as you're seen as just a conqueror who took over these lands, then it's going to be very much more likely, I'd say, for those places to lose your support in some way and fall to some other powers. And so it seems like the only way, and I got to give credit to Sweden, that it's like being, what's it, like a video game analogy, or Risk, a board game. It's like being given the most crappy luck starting area, but doing well with it and then losing. It's like you had no chance to really win anyway, but you survived so long that it's just goddamn impressive that you were able to have the territory and power as long as you did. But yeah, the terrifying thing is that if you are going to conquer new land and keep that land, you have to either kill or convert it, subjugate them to such a thorough level that over time they are Swedish. They are not some territory that, you know what I'm saying? Not, and it's kind of a tragedy that the countries that have so ruthlessly subjugated their subjects are the ones that have the most stability. Isn't that crazy? Love y'all. Hope you guys are all doing well. Would appreciate any comments down below if you disagree with me or can teach me something or answer any of the questions I asked. Would appreciate it. You guys have Swedish meatballs thanks to Charles the 12th staying in the Ottoman Empire, right? That's a cool story. Bye, guys. See you next time. Bye.
As a great military power were well
I said I press pause instead of stop, and now there's awkward. I'm not cutting this out. All right. Love y'all. See you next time. Bye. Correct button.